The second round series between the San Antonio Spurs and Houston Rockets will be going to 6 games as the Rockets beat the Spurs Sunday evening in Game 4, 125-104 in Houston, Texas. I am Paul Garcia of ProjectSpurs.com. Please make sure to follow us at Project Spurs and my Twitter handle as well at Paul Garcia NBA, and visit the website ProjectSpurs.com. Let's go ahead and break down what happened Sunday evening in Houston, where the Spurs ended up seeing themselves finding themselves down 25. The Rockets built an early 15-point lead. San Antonio got that as close as 2 points, but then Houston again blew it up in the second half. So Houston evens the series. Both teams have 2 wins each. San Antonio, it's now a best-of-3 series with San Antonio having the home court edge in 2 of these last 3 matchups before Game 5. So let's go ahead and break this game down. So the Spurs' 3 playmakers who they need to rely on each night now that Tony Parker's out is still Kawhi Leonard, LaMarcus Aldridge, and Patty Mills. Let's break down Kawhi's game. So he finishes with a playoff low 16 points on just 14 shots. He stayed robotic and shooting 50% from the field, stayed efficient basically. He only got to the free throw line 3 times, and he just dished 4 assists for his team, and he played 30 minutes. So Kawhi actually didn't play in the entire fourth quarter because the game was kind of already out of hand. When Pop was getting ready to put him back in, it was too much. The lead, Pop would rather just conserve his minutes for Game 5 and 6 rather than putting Kawhi out there in a blowout. For Kawhi's last time that he had scored this low was 18 against Memphis when the Spurs again got blown out there in Game 3 of that series. So you can just see that anytime the San Antonio's not close of bringing that game back, Pop's not going to wear his legs out. Let's talk about what the Rockets did to hold Kawhi to 16 points in this game. So he was again guarded by Trevor Ariza mostly. Houston always, one thing they did, whether let's just say Kawhi got a mismatch with like somebody like James Harden or Lou Williams or even Ariza, they always had help defenders in the paint to make sure that they were ready in case Kawhi broke the individual defender down, and they had help just in case it showed more bodies at the rim for him. One thing you saw from Houston a little bit more in the half court was on his pick and rolls was they really trapped Kawhi very aggressively to where he had to hit that rolling center, and he had to rely on his other playmakers to make plays. And as you can see, he only had 4 assists, so his other guys. Teammates didn't make the plays that they really needed him to do. He had to play both ends again. He guarded James Harden, but Harden again got some switches, got some action where Kawhi had to switch off, but he was mainly guarding Harden for the whole game. His best quarter was that second quarter where he put up 11 points and 3 assists as well. But overall, he just didn't have a huge. He was still San Antonio's go-to option, but the Rockets' defense did a better job of kind of just holding his attempts, and of course his minutes weren't there as well because of he didn't have to play in the fourth quarter. One thing he did that was very notable was when Nene had an early injury in the first half with the groin injury, so he was out for the remainder of the game. And then Clint Capella got an early foul trouble in that first half. And one thing you saw Kawhi do was he went straight to the rim and tried to got a little bit more aggressive in that second quarter, where he scored 11 points. LaMarcus Aldridge scored 16 points on 13 shots, so he too had a good field goal percentage, 54%. 5 rebounds, and he turned the ball over 3 times in 24 minutes. But when you actually watched the actual game, it was when his scoring didn't come at the right time for San Antonio, almost. He almost was a little bit different. Whereas in Game 2 and 3, whether his shot was falling or not, if he got that pick and pop, that mid-range look, he would immediately take it. When he got the post up, he didn't wait. He didn't wait for the help defense to come. He would just do his turnaround over the shoulder shot and take it. This time he kind of waited a little bit too long. He had, like I said, 3 turnovers. He was just either he went too quick or he took too long to make his decisions with the ball in that game. He had a pretty rough first half. He had 6 points in the second quarter, but then he got into foul trouble, so he really couldn't find a rhythm in that first quarter. Also, he didn't get a lot of attempts. In the third quarter, he scored 10 points, but there was some times when he had smaller guys like James Harden on him or Patrick Beverley, and the Spurs' defenders, offensive players, didn't really throw him those inbound passes as much as they could have taken advantage of paying for the Rockets' lack of size. Patty Mills scores 10 points, and he takes only 7 shots, so he too had a pretty good efficient field goal percentage, but 7 shots is a limited amount for Patty. One thing he did do well, though, because the Rockets were forcing him off the line, he was more of a playmaker now. He actually had 5 assists for the Spurs in finding his teammates, but again, they're going to need his scoring now that Tony's out, and they need him and LaMarcus, and so Patty has to be a little bit more aggressive in trying to find his looks as well on the offensive end. He plays 28 minutes in that game. LaMarcus also as well didn't play at all in the fourth quarter, so he got that fourth quarter off. Looking at what the Rockets' defense did to the Spurs' offense, they held San Antonio to 49% shooting. That's actually better than what they shot in Game 3, San Antonio. But it was almost like a back and forth where there was really no stops made for the Spurs' defense for the majority of the night. Houston just would score, then Spurs would come back and score, and it just ended up being that way for a good majority of the time. The Spurs' 3-point shots did not fall. They only shot 7-23 from the 3-point line. They shot just 30%. That's not going to help you win a road game when you're San Antonio. This next area is where they really had some trouble, especially when the game was kind of close still. The Spurs left 9 points at the free throw line. So they shot 9 of 18 from the free throw line, 50%. And some of these misses were key when the game was still kind of in realm of San Antonio trying to make a comeback. Even a guy like Kawhi missed 2 free throws. It was just a night where San Antonio didn't hit their free throws. They're going to need to do that in Game 5 and Game 6 if they want to try to win the series. That was a big part, was the free throw shooting. The Spurs still moved the ball, 23 assists on 44 shots made. They only assisted on 52% of their makes, which is over half of their makes, but they did face some of those scoring lulls, as I'm going to talk about a little bit when we get to the 6-minute increments charts, where they found those times when they just couldn't put over 10 points in a 6-minute stretch. The Rockets part of it is Spurs missed shots, and part of it is the Rockets' defense did a little bit better job as well, staying focused. The one thing that's hurting the Spurs is the turnovers. So they had 14 turnovers, and Houston, of course, converted those quickly into points. So the Rockets got 17 points. That helps the Rockets' transition game. That's something that San Antonio, again, has to. It's almost expected because Tony Parker's out, but that's still something that they have to try to limit as much as possible. Kawhi had 3 turnovers in this game, and so did LaMarcus Aldridge with 3 turnovers as well. The bench scoring, the Spurs outscored the Rockets 53-50, so both benches were almost even. Some of that data is skewed because it was a blowout. So in the fourth quarter, both Pop and Mike D'Antoni both went deep into their benches after the 7.5-minute mark, and a lot of guys basically got some points on the board. One guy who was impactful for San Antonio was Jonathan Simmons. He ends up bringing up 17 points off the bench on 12 shots, so he shoots 50%. He got to the free throw line the most on the team with 4 free throw attempts, but he did have 3 turnovers. Simmons had a pretty good second quarter there when Pop would play the small ball lineup. And in the fourth quarter, he was trying to do everything to keep San Antonio in the game. I think he had 8 points in that fourth quarter to start, but the Rockets on the other end, just because they were playing small ball, they were just feasting on David Lee trying to guard the rim. So they were getting points, so it was kind of not as impactful for the Spurs. Looking at the Spurs' 6-minute increments chart. This is something to focus on. So the Spurs, they want to try to avoid those scoring droughts. They only had 1 in Game 3. Well, now in Game 4, they had 2 scoring droughts, and they came at the worst times. The first one came in the first 6 minutes of the ball game. San Antonio only scored 9 points in 6 minutes. On the opposite side, the Rockets scored 17 points in 6 minutes. So that's an 8-point difference. That already put the Spurs in a hole. They were actually down 15 in that first quarter at one time. Then at the start of the third quarter, where the Spurs were only down 4 points at halftime, the Rockets outscored them 8-19. And as I get to the Spurs' defense, I'm going to talk about the lineup that was very important for Houston that really changed that second half, that really blew the game open, where San Antonio fell apart. Now we're going to talk about the Spurs' defense. The Rockets shot 53% from the floor. They made 19 of 43 threes. They shot 44% from the 3-point line. This is a major concern for the Spurs' defense. This showed that some of the looks were contested, but many of them weren't. There were a lot of uncontested looks for the Rockets. Part of that's kind of with the Spurs' game plan, but other parts aren't as much. In Game 1, the Rockets made 22 threes. Now in Game 4, they made 19. They took 50 threes in Game 1, and now in Game 4, they took 43, and they shot a good percentage, which was 44%. So some ways that they got those threes, they made more of their other guys outside of Harden, their playmakers. Trevor Ariza, one thing he did that was very crucial was when the Spurs would try to hard hedge with LaMarcus Aldridge on Harden, Ariza usually pops out for a 3 because it takes Aldridge a few seconds to get back to Ariza. Well, now what Ariza did was a little bit different. Was he quickly rolled, kind of just slipped past instead of waiting to do a pick and pop jumper. He went for a pick and roll. So either he got to look in the rim, or he got to look to kick out to an open 3-point shooter, and that was somewhat of an adjustment that the Rockets made. One thing James Harden talked about post game was how he told his the other playmakers, Patrick Beverley, Ariza, some of these guys, Eric Gordon, Lou Williams, that they need to be more aggressive. Whether the shots go in or out, they just got to stay aggressive with that driving kick action, or just taking the shots to keep their offense afloat. And sure enough, it worked, as the Rockets just took a lot of threes, 43, and they made a good majority of them. That really just put that right there. It makes it hard for any defense to guard them. Houston didn't get to the line as much as 6 of 10 free throws, but they didn't really have to when they're making 19 threes. On the board, San Antonio won the battle 43-41. The Rockets only got 7 offensive rebounds, and part of that is just because they did make more threes this time. This was something that Coach Pop talked about, the transition. The Rockets got 15 points in transition. That's something the Spurs don't want to allow to happen, but they still did it. The pace was played at 100.66 possessions per 48 minutes. That's about 4 possessions higher than what the Spurs usually want to play at. It was kind of the same possession mark as in Game 3, but this time the Rockets actually made their shots, and so that ended up being a huge difference. You really got to break down some of those possessions, though. A lot of times the Rockets, because of Nene's injury and because Capella got put into foul trouble, the Rockets had to run Ryan Anderson at the 5. And while the Spurs were able to score on that lineup a little bit, it was still tough because on the opposite end, the Rockets would run a 5-out attack, and so the paint was constantly open for the Rockets to attack the rim on the Spurs, and they got a lot of points in the paint that way. Ariza ended up having 16 points and 5 assists for the Rockets, and Ryan Anderson contributed 13. That was big for them to get some more depth outside of just their usual playmakers. One thing about the first quarter was that in that first quarter, the Rockets tried to dictate the pace early. The pace was played in that first quarter at 112.56 possessions per 48 minutes. So the Rockets really tried to push that tempo early from the get-go, and though it didn't stay as high as that, it was still important for them to kind of set the tone early. They were the aggressor in that fact, and that's something that San Antonio has to make sure doesn't happen in San Antonio for Game 5. One lineup I do want to talk about that was very key was that third quarter lineup. So Mike D'Antoni made a change. He ended up starting the second half with Patrick Beverley at the 1, Eric Gordon at the 2, Harden at the 3, Trevor Ariza at the 4, and Clint Capella at the 5. That lineup in 7 minutes outscored the Spurs by 117 points per 100 possessions. So that was their net rating, 117 plus 117 points per 100 possessions. When you take that into 48 minutes data, just a regular game data, that in those 7 minutes the Rockets had a 12-point lead after that stretch of that with that lineup with just 3 minutes left in the third quarter. So that basically put the game away from San Antonio, put them in a bad position after they were just down 4. They had actually made it a 2-point game to kick off the third quarter, but then after that it was tough for them to really take advantage, and the Rockets ended up blowing the game out with that lineup of Gordon at the 2. Looking at the Rockets as players, James Harden finishes with 28 points on 18 shots, has an efficient shooting night, collects 12 assists. Eric Gordon, this was key. He brings 22 points off the bench, and as I said, he started the third quarter on just 13 shots, so he had a really efficient percentage. This is hard when you look at Gordon is the guy for Houston, Patty Mills is the guy for San Antonio. So basically, Gordon outscored Patty, though they didn't guard each other the whole game. Gordon outscored Patty 22-10. That's something that can't happen. They got to try to keep Gordon limited as much as possible. Patrick Beverley, it was a rough night for him. Prior to the game, there was news that his grandfather had passed away, so he was obviously very emotional. That's a tough thing to do to try to get through a ball game. He commented after the game how he actually was probably going to try to go straight to Chicago where his family was, but a lot of his family members told him to play the game. And so it was good for him and the Rockets that they came out a win. That was really good to see Beverley get that win. He kicked off the game with an open 3-pointer and he made that shot. So he finishes with 10 points on 9 shots, and he was very key. And when the Spurs ran him off the 3-point line, he continued to attack and find his teammates on the outside, and he ended up tallying 6 assists for the Rockets. That was a huge number for him. And then Lou Williams, he didn't have a great shooting night, just 15 shots, but he helped the Rockets with 13 points. He really kept the lead afloat for them when Harden was resting by making some of those tough mid-range jumpers, and that's kind of the skill set that he has. That's something that he hadn't been doing in games 2 and 3, but it shows the potential of Williams, despite him taking a lot of shots, that he can still keep the Rockets' scoring going when Harden's resting in the game. So some Game 5 now. Game 5 will be Tuesday, May 9th at 7 p.m. The series shifts back to San Antonio. It's now a best of 3 series. Game 6 will take place Thursday in Houston. So some adjustments the Spurs need to look to is probably try to get Aldridge going a little bit earlier again. That's something that really works for them, is when they try to get him in a quick rhythm. That way that can kind of carry over for the remainder of the game. And obviously he needs to try to avoid foul trouble. They also got to look at maybe working on their moving the ball when Kawhi gets trapped. I think that's something that worked pretty well for Houston. And that's something the Grizzlies did a lot to the Spurs, and they kind of figured it out. And so that's something I think that you're going to see San Antonio work on, is trying to get that ball out of Kawhi's hands quicker when the Rockets do try to trap him, and making sure to move it to where they get somebody a little bit more effective. One guy who had a pretty decent game was DeJounte Murray. There was some times when he knows that the Rockets don't respect him. They're going to help off him from three. So what he did was, anytime he caught it later I think it was the second quarter, where he would attack their defense, because they're expecting him to take an uncontested three, but instead he's so agile and he's so crafty in getting to the rim. He was able to make a few floaters and layups, and that's something I think that Murray can really do to kind of hurt Houston, since they're leaving him wide open. I think the Spurs definitely need to be ready for that small ball lineup with Eric Gordon at the 2. That might be something D'Antoni starts right out of the gate, or again, it could be a change that he makes in the second half. That was something that gave the Spurs defense fits, because now Aldridge is having to still guard Reeves at the 4, but then there's just a mismatch. Gordon's another scorer for the Rockets, and it's hard just to key in on James Harden. And the Spurs need to make a decision on whether or not they're going to take advantage of mismatches or continue to run their game plan. So what I'm talking about is, like, in the third quarter, it was very obvious that Pau Gasol and James Harden had a mismatch where they get matched up with James Harden a lot in the low block. And when you see a little guy and a big guy, the instinct is to naturally just, hey, go to that mismatch, to exploit the mismatch. However, this didn't work quite well for the Spurs, because the Rockets were able to double team, collapse, and it just didn't work out where the Spurs were forcing some turnovers or some bad shots. It's almost like they abandoned their game plan to go at that mismatch, but it didn't work quite well. So maybe even if that mismatch is there, maybe they just need to still continue to stick to their game plan, which is run a lot more pick and roll action and try to get Kawhi or Aldridge some of their more efficient looks. So that'll be something interesting to watch as well going into Game 5 for the Spurs and Rockets. For Project Spurs, I am Paul Garcia.